You want to know about the Chindits, do you? Well, the first thing I'll say is that our creation did not come about easily. You see, our creator was a man named Lord Wingate, a rather disliked officer of the Indian Army at the time. In fact, he was so openly disliked that many of the officers of the Indian Army would simply call him elitist, unnecessary. Despite all this, he manages to catch the ear of a rather important man, General Archibald Wavell. And after a brief discussion, the general was finally convinced that he doesn't hang about. No, he quickly creates the 77th Indian Infantry Brigade, otherwise known as the Chindits. Now, this brigade of ours was made up of mainly inexperienced troops, mostly from the Indian Army at the time, though I do believe a few regiments came from Britain. In fact, the Royal Liverpool Regiment were dragged all the way up coastal duties, all the way to India, and asked to serve behind enemy lines. And as I lay eyes upon these men as they arrive, I felt sorry for them. So I don't mean to be rude, but on average they're around 30 years old, which is getting on a bit for a soldier. And they've never even seen a jungle before. No, they haven't served in one. No, I looked at them and I knew there was a lot of training ahead for them. Although, if I am honest, there was a lot of training ahead for all of us. But what we're about to embark on was a rather new occurrence. Now, we spent 3 months, all in all, starting off with forced marches, fieldcraft, the usual. Moving on to more specific forms of training, such as sabotage and fieldcraft. No, the most peculiar part of our training happened to be the fact that we had to rehearse with the RAF. Because you see, we were going to be supplied strictly by air during this operation, which is a rather common occurrence these days, but at the time it had never been heard of. All in all, we had those 3 months of rigorous training, and finally we were deemed ready. Deemed ready to go deep behind enemy lines and act in a strictly offensive capacity as our creator, Lord Wingate, had always wanted. Now, you see, our little operation was going to be part of a much larger one, involving both the American and Chinese forces. The whole idea was we would lay down a large front line against the Japanese forces in Burma. That'd be us, the British, Chinese and Americans, pushing up against them, and then us, the Chindits, where we'd be deployed behind enemy lines, and there would weaken the Japanese resolve. Unfortunately, about 2 weeks before the operation is to be undertaken, the Americans decide that their resources are better suited elsewhere, and they leave the plan. Now, the Chinese hear about the Americans leaving, and they lose faith in the entire idea, and they also leave the plan. One left the British high and dry. Quite frankly, we were outmanned and outgunned and it stood. So even we, the British, even we pulled out of our very own plan. I used to say to people, I'd say the Chindits, well, we were almost defeated before we even left India. Still, Lord Wingate, being the zealous man he was, goes up to the general despite these drawbacks, and he has a conversation. A conversation where I'm sure he shares a few words that I can't repeat with polite company. But amongst those words he says this: there's plenty of information to be had, plenty of experience to be gained from their deployment. And finally, we received our orders. Now, those orders are simple. We're to take a 3-day train journey from the south of India up to the north. There we had a 120-mile march to the border, 12 days of rather welcome rest, and then a further march into Burma itself, crossing the Chindit River, and finally arriving behind enemy lines. Now, once we reached behind enemy lines, we were permitted a few luxuries. One of my favourite being that we're allowed to grow out our beards and hair. Not too many barbers in the jungle, you see. Now, in terms of equipment, well, you got what you were given. And this is what we had. We had a pair of boots, short gaiters, khaki shirt and slacks. We had our haversack, our backpack and our webbing, which came to around £66 in total. And in terms of weaponry, well, I was lucky enough to be gifted one of these. Now, this is the Thompson submachine gun, the M1A1. Comes with a 20-round stick magazine of 45 ACP. And I was given 6 spare magazines for that. Now, as an officer of my regiment, I was also issued with a .38 Webley revolver and given 40 spare rounds for that. Now, that can sound like a lot of ammunition to the uninitiated, but I can assure you now, when your next supply drop was 6 days away at best, it really wasn't. I used to tell my men, look after your ammunition, and your ammunition will look after you. Still, just in case you did not follow my advice, as an officer of a Gurkha regiment, I was also issued with one of these. The legendary fighting knife of the Gurkha for cookery. Now, a knife like this, as legendary as it was, well, how to put it? It's a rather terrible weapon in the right hand. In fact, a good example of this would be when we were out there in Burma. Now, we lay siege to a Japanese entrenchment. We managed to clear out most of that mess, but we'd run out of ammunition, and there's a single machine gun nest bursting its rounds down upon our heads. So I tell my men to keep their heads down and simply wait. We'll just wait for the Japanese to exhaust themselves, and we'll storm the place by hand. But as I'm instructing my men, I turned to my left. And there he was, one of my Gurkhas, just not sharing my sense of patience, starting to stalk up towards the machine gun nest with nothing more than a kukri in his hand and a smoke grenade. Now he arrives upon the enemy, stands outside the entrance, pulls the smoke grenade pin and rolls it inside, and there he stands and he waits. Now I'm watching as this smoke starts to billow out of the machine gun nest. I start to hear the panicked voices of the Japanese soldiers inside, and 4 silhouettes emerge within the smoke. And one by one, a single swing each time. That Gurkha separated 4 heads from 4 sets of shoulders. So maybe you understand me when I say this is a truly terrible weapon in the right hands. Now, of course, a knife as legendary as this has many stories that revolve around it. One of my favourite being that once the Gurkha has drawn his kukri, it may never be sheathed before he first puts it back. Before it tastes blood, I should say, really. And whilst that makes a fantastic story, and one that I like to perpetuate from time to time, the truth of the matter is, yes, of course you use it to chop your way through your enemy, but you're more likely to be using it to chop your way through the undergrowth in the jungle, opening up a can of corned beef. This was as much a tool as it was a weapon. I was rather glad to have it by my side. Now when we finally crossed that Chindit river, we arrived behind enemy lines, and it's at this point that our group of 3,000 men are separated into 2 groups. You had your southern group, the distraction group, then you had your northern group, the main group that I was assigned to. Now I was assigned along with the 3rd column. That was me and my 32nd Gurkha rifles. We were roughly around 350 men strong. And by being part of the 3rd column, we found ourselves under the command of a man known as Mike Calvert. And Mike Calvert was quite a remarkable individual. A man I will not soon forget. Now, built a bit like a boxer. Keen swimmer, army champion at both, so I'm told, but of course that's not the reason I remember him. No, the reason I remember Mike Calvert was he was the sort of officer who would lead through example. I once witnessed this man stand upright in a firefight and tell one of the other soldiers that they were not in good enough colour. Now that was the sort of man Mike Calvert was. He earned the love and the respect of every Gurkha that served underneath him. And do you know what the sad joke was? He couldn't speak a word of their language. He couldn't say hello, he couldn't say thank you. Yet for some reason these men would follow him to hell and back. No, with a man like Mike Calvert leading your column, you rarely fell into enemy ambushes. They were constantly falling into ours. In fact, I recall on one occasion, we were instructed to lay an ambush for a Japanese patrol. Fairly simple operation. We knew exactly which jungle path they'd be going down, so we simply waited in the undergrowth for them. And well, we waited, and we waited, and we waited, and well, we waited so long I thought we'd have bad intelligence. And suddenly I could start to hear the faint patter of boots or mud. And then the Japanese patrol just arrives around the corner. Now they're moving rather fast, but that was the only thing going against us. The poor chaps had no idea we were there. Their rifles were by their side, they were chatting to one another. Now I tell my men to keep quiet and wait for my signal. Now I take my Thompson and I begin tracking them down the path, waiting for them. The guy's pretty fast too early! As soon as he starts to join in, we start raking the jungle in automatic and rifle fire. Now the first Japanese soldiers that caught this fusillade of bullets, they twist, they jerk, they hit the ground. Now the second they manage to shoulder their rifles, they follow suit. The smell of call out was strong in the air, and then silence. As if nothing had even happened. The only evidence of any ambush now lay dead in that hollow. Now I start walking over towards their bodies, start counting them, make sure we get the last one. And there was 1, 2, 3. There were 9 bodies on that ground, and I could have sworn I saw at least 10 men. Rifle fire rings overhead! I get myself out of the hollow and into some undergrowth, and there I wait. A grenade goes off! Now I decide the best course of action is to somehow get back to my allies and try and lead them through this mess. Now I make my way out to the undergrowth, and as I do so I happen upon a clearing. As I stand there he was. The last Japanese soldier, he shouldered his rifle, he's about to shoot into my men. I give him a quick bounce with the Thompson. And then what happens next I'll never forget. The man's body just arcs backwards. His rifle slips from his hand and he hits the ground with a thud. And I don't know why I did it. And I walked over to him. His face was grey, there was blood trickling from the mouth. The eyes were still open, looking at me rather accusingly, in fact. And when it was in that moment that it dawned on me, these weren't just monsters hunting us down in the jungle, they were men. They were men like you or I. Lying there was a son or a husband to a family that would never see them again because of what I've just done. Still, I know for a fact that man would have shot me without hesitation if he'd seen me first. So I remember just walking away, trying to forget the face. After all, us men, we can control our thoughts, but not necessarily our dreams. Now I go back to my men, and by some miracle, those bullets seeking out the grass almost missed their mark. But one hadn't. Lying there was a Gurkha. Blood all over the stomach. Poor chap will have to hear me cut in two. And as soon as I laid my eyes upon him, I knew he was not coming with us. No, we survived because we moved, because we were quick. No room for the wounded amongst us, no. And as he's lying there screaming, my mind starts to drift towards the haversack. You see in there, us officers were given some small capsules. Morphine. Put a man out of his misery rather permanently, if you understand me. To my shame, I hesitated. I hesitated for far too long in a vain hope that they'd just die without my help, and of course he didn't. No, he didn't. No, he just keeps lying there screaming and shouting and yelling and fighting. And then soon I find myself by his side, and as he screams, I place the capsule in his mouth. He just goes quiet. And I still remember when I looked up and I saw my men, and they were looking at me as if I was one of the enemy. The faces just twisted with disgust. You see, I was their officer. I was meant to lead them through this mess, not murder them in some godforsaken jungle. Well, that's just life and death behind any lies. I apologise. I got... Where was I before the ambush? Right, of course. So we've just landed in Burma, we got over that Chindit River, and all in all we spent 3 months there. And we do everything we said we would. We call in airstrikes, we lay down ambushes, we set up booby traps, and we send those Japanese on a right merry dance for the lot of it. Without that larger force to distract them, well, they just sent their men after us. Great groups of men just snaring the columns one by one. Well, if you're lucky like us, we'll manage to escape them, well, you get pushed further and further up into this arid, dry heartland of Burma. Well, once we pushed over the Irrawaddy, there was very little for it. Now, by that point, we couldn't get any supplies. Most of the men had lost around a third of their body weight through sickness or starvation. And luckily for us, we got our last order on the radio. And it was simple. Make for safety. That's what they said. And what we knew about men, that meant you said, get yourself out of Burma. Get yourself into India, get yourself into China, it didn't matter where, just get yourself out of Burma. So after 3 months of operations, that night we gather around one of Calvert's famous fires, all the officers. We've all reserved a little bit of rum for such a moment. And we raise a toast. A toast to the third column and everything we'd achieved. And it's at that point that Mike Calvert stands up in front of all of us and he gives us his last orders. And if I recall them correctly, they sounded like this. March methodically, but do not over time. Time, mercy, makes cowards of us all. If you find yourself up against it, you sit yourselves down, you make yourself a cup of tea. Everything will sort itself out. Whatever you do not lose more men to starvation or drowning in trying to avoid the Japanese. If you need to cross the river, you find a boat. If you can't find a boat in one place, you find a boat in another. If you can't find a boat at all, you make a raft at night and you push off. It doesn't matter how far down you drift. Whatever you do not let that hunted feeling get to you. And I want to make sure that every man has a map, distances and directions marked upon them. And when you make it back and you pass our frontline troops, I want them to see the drill. I want them to see the saluting, not some defeated army. No. It is true. We've been under a great strain together. But why don't we keep our dirty washing to ourselves? I was very thankful for Calvert that evening. Gave me and a lot of the other officers courage that we sorely needed in that moment. So the next morning we wake up, break up into groups of 40 men roughly, and we all go our separate ways. Now personally I go down south, almost retracing the steps I took to get there, and me and my men, we made it back safely into India. But it is on that return journey we lose most of our men, unfortunately. 3,000 of us go out there. 2,000 come back. 120 killed in action. A handful of Burmese rifles which stay at home and look after their families. And well, the rest of those chaps are captured by the Japanese. Going to work in the god-awful camps of theirs. Well, most of those men never saw their homes again. It's funny, really. Every time I tell this story, I always get asked the same question. How did you do it? How did you make it through that mess? The truth is, I don't have a better answer than just to say I was one of the lucky ones. That's what it was. Still, I hear if you go and find Mike Calvert and you ask him the very same question, you know what he'll say to you? He'll say, luck! How? Luck had nothing to do with it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Cheers.
Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please click on the like button below so that I know what people like and I know what to make more of. Alternatively, if you've enjoyed it and think you'd like to see more, please click on the subscribe button. That way you get notified by YouTube whenever I bring out a new video. And you never know, there might be something in there that you hadn't considered, because I do cover a variety of things on the channel. And finally, if you have a little bit of cash going, I now have a Patreon account. I'm always looking for patrons, because at the end of the day, let's be perfectly honest, it's a good way for me to get a little bit of money that will use to buy review items or to travel to museums and so on. I don't put a huge amount on that. At the minute, all we've got is one tier charging £1 a month, which just, as I say, helps cover my costs. See you soon.